So Dr. Ian Foster holds many, many hats, all of them, one bigger than the other. So the chief of them is that he is the director of the Data Science and Learning Division at Argonne National Lab. He is also a senior scientist and distinguished fellow at Argonne, and also the Arthur Holly Compton Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Chicago. He received his Bachelor in Science from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand and his PhD from the Imperial College in the UK, and both of them are in computer science. And since then, he had an outstanding career. He authored more than 100 publications, received numerous awards. He is also elected fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and other professional societies. And his interests are in data-driven discovery, high-performance computing, in application to the data-intensive disciplines, a whole range of them, from climate change to biomedicine. And so let's welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Ian Foster.
Hey, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here at JGI. I haven't been there myself, but I have many colleagues who use the facilities, which I'm told are wonderful. So I'm going to talk to you about, as I say here, the title said robotic partners, but I realized I was using the word robot in the sense of automation in general. So AI partners. I want to explain to you why I think we should be thinking a lot about recent and emerging AI technologies and what we might do to prepare for the use of these technologies. So first of all, I believe in knowing one's memes. And I'm not that well informed, but I did a bit of work and found out the original origin of this. The meme, I for one welcome my new something overlord. So this is it. Let's see if I can make it go.
And I, for one, welcome our new insect overlords.
Okay, that's it. So but not AI overlords, but AI partners. Anyway, so as we know, we just heard mention of petabytes. We live in interesting times, greatly increasing data rates. Many more publications containing many more sources of information, increasingly complex problems. All of these, I think, are growing exponentially, it appears. The only things that aren't growing exponentially are the researchers and funding that we have available to work on these things. So, simple analysis suggests that if your problem scale and the amount of resources you have to work with are increasing exponentially, and your resources stay flat, your ability to do anything is going to go down exponentially as well. Only by assembling techniques that allow you to work exponentially faster are you going to be able to keep up. And if you're going to try and do even better, you need to do something else, super exponential improvement. So how are we going to acquire these? Or how are we going to enable these optimizations? So, first of all, I'll mention the Red Queen's Race, which I think we're all probably familiar with. If not, it's a wonderful book just pointing out in order to keep up, we need to run twice as fast as we might think we had to just to do well. Okay, so and this previous is the Red Queen as envisioned in 1871. And here we have a 2024 version thanks to ChatGPT. And perhaps that's a hint as to how we might do better. So we're all familiar with the scientific method. It dates back a long time. For a long time, it was slow and labor-intensive thanks to almost total lack of automation. Of course, nowadays we have tremendous amounts of automation, which allows us to work faster, but not exponentially faster, I would say, in most cases, because there are so many still manual steps in this overall process. We might be able to generate data thousands of times faster. We might be able to use a supercomputer to analyze it from some perspectives, but other steps in the process remain often manual or sequential, and therefore become bottlenecks in the discovery process. So how are we going to do better? Well, one approach which I think has a lot of promise is to engage various forms of so-called AI agents in various parts of this process. And I'll say more about what I mean by an AI agent in a minute, but here are some examples. Perhaps using generative models to generate hypotheses, given what we know, which we may then be able to evaluate by automated experimental systems that are configured using other forms of generative model that know how to generate experimental protocols. Or using various forms of new AI technologies to extract large amounts of structured data from unstructured data sources. There's a tremendous variety of activities underway at the moment seeking to accelerate various parts of these processes by the use of these so-called AI agents, which encompass a range of AI methods. So why should we think that this is something that's feasible to take on? Well, first of all, we'll point out that we have seen tremendous advances in so-called AI methods over the last small number of years. So, this slide here shows the increases reported in scores on various tests intended to capture some aspects of human intelligence, from reading comprehension to code generation with speech recognition and so forth in the middle. If you look at these individual tests, well, you can either, let's go back there. I think in some cases you'll be astonished by, I don't know why it's going automatically forward now, that's interesting. Is this faulty? Oh, it seems to have stopped now. All right, that's good. I'm encouraged. Okay, some of these you may find them trivial, but others not. So it wants me to go forward, so I'm going to go forward. So to get some insights into why things have improved so much, I encourage you to look at a paper, a rather long paper by a fellow called Leopold Aschenbrenner. Has anyone read this? Some of you probably had, called Situational Awareness. And he argues that the reason for these improvements is due to what he calls a increase in the effective compute being applied to AI systems. And effective compute, he says, is increased by 7 orders of magnitude in 5 years. So what that sounds a lot, given that computing is only increased by 1 order of magnitude in the past 5 years, as measured, for example, by exaflop computers, which are the ones that we run at the Department of Energy labs. Well, the reason how he accounts for this is he says there's actually 3 reasons why things have increased. First of all, physical compute has increased actually by 3 to 4 orders of magnitude during that period. So how can that be? Well, it's because people are spending much more money in computing systems. The large AI companies were computing, they're training their models on a little handful of GPUs. Now they're using multi-billion-dollar data centers to train them. So money and improved computing systems. And then the algorithms that they're using for training are increasing in performance thanks to huge numbers of people working to improve those algorithms. And finally, he talks about what he calls algorithmic unhobbling, which it means coming up with new ways of using large language models. So back in the day, you used them just to predict the next token in a sentence. But now you do things like chat interactions, where you might ask multiple questions, and that allows them to be more effective at many of the problems that I showed earlier. So those 3 factors together add up to this 7 orders of magnitude in 5 years. And that's why we've seen these tremendous advancements in these AI system capabilities. Then going forward, and this becomes speculative, he says he expects to see, we should expect to see, he argues, increased capabilities from the large commercial providers at least, and we would hope also from DOE labs and other major operators of supercomputers. More physical compute increases, more advances in algorithmic efficiencies, and this can be for reasons like lower precision arithmetic, better encodings, better training regimes, and more improvements from unhobbling by, for example, dividing applications into sets of agents that converse with each other as well as with human scientists. And that could then translate to perhaps another 5 to 6 orders of magnitude improvement over the next 5 years. So he then attempts to map those improvements into capabilities of particular classes of people. I don't know whether we need to take that so seriously, but the point that he's striking to make, and I think we need to be painfully very aware of, is that we should expect to see major improvements in the capabilities of AI systems that are already quite remarkable over the next 5 to 7 years. Now, it may be that he's wrong and that, in fact, we've reached the peak of these systems, in which case, well, actually, I think we've already got some remarkably powerful tools to make use of, but I'm not sure that we should be betting on that, given the literally hundreds of billions of dollars that have been invested in this space by both US companies and increasingly also the largely competitors of the US overseas, for example, in China, which is investing also billions of dollars in AI for general purpose use and also for science. So we might conclude, I would suggest that, as someone said, if you can read down the bottom there, AI will not replace scientists, but scientists who use AI will replace those who do not use AI. So we might think, well, what does that mean, therefore? You know, what might science with AI assistance look like, and how might we prepare for a future in which AI, with science of AI assistance, is how we undertake our work. Well, I mentioned agents earlier, so let me say a few words about that. It's a term of art in the AI community. It refers, as we say here, to a computational system that can interact with its environment and learn from those interactions. So a computational system, it's something that's persistent, stateful, it runs for extended periods. It can sense and act. What does that mean? Sensing might mean taking measurements, acting might mean running a computation or performing an experiment. It can be physical or virtual. A physical agent might interact with experimental apparatus. A virtual one might simply run on a computer. And learning, it's going to be able to adapt its responses by observing what works and what doesn't work. And I'll give you some examples of that in a minute. So I would argue, and many others would argue also, that the future of science will increasingly see us creating embodied agents of this sort that build expertise in and can assist us with a wide variety of different activities. So let's look at some examples of what those will be. But first of all, I should say a word about foundation models. Probably most of us know this term by now, but it's worth pointing out just for those who aren't. This is a generic term of art for that encompasses large language models, but also other forms of models like protein language models, models of, well, in a sense, AlphaFold, you could say, is a foundation model specialized on crystal protein structure. It's basically a large model trained on very large quantities of data, labeled and unlabeled data, trained further to enable human interactions or agentic interactions, and with this often surprising ability to be able to be used for purposes beyond what it was perhaps originally trained for. So ChatGPT is a large language model. GenSlim, the genome sequence model created by Arvind Ramanathan, is one. AlphaFold is one. There are others that have been developed for example, for weather forecasting and such purposes. And various groups across DOE are working to build large language models for science. An interesting question is going to be to what extent they can deliver superior performance to the very general purpose language models being produced by the likes of Meta and OpenAI and so forth. A key point about these models is that they are typically trained on very large amounts of data, trillions of tokens, basically a unit of data, and can take weeks or months on very large computers. So they're not something that one can create in a weekend in your basement. You need to sort of nation state, or at least large billion-dollar corporation or national lab resources. So that's something we should be thinking about, is how do we assemble the resources to build such systems to the extent we think we need them. So let me give you an example now of, I'm going to go back to agents and give you some examples of how agents might look. So this is, I'm reporting on some work here by Priyanka Sethi, is a student at Chicago, working with Arvind Ramanathan and myself, building an almost trivial agent, but it's one that's intended to respond to questions about peptides. And you want to be able to ask it, on which organism is a particular peptide acting? Which I guess is a meaningful question. I'm not a peptide scientist. And the way it goes about doing this is almost trivially simple. It first of all queries PubMed to retrieve abstracts that refer to the named peptide, and then uses a technique called retrieval augmented generation by posing a question to ChatGPT saying, given these abstracts, this text, answer the question on which organism is this peptide acting. And it does actually surprisingly well in many cases, despite ChatGPT not being specialized for this particular domain of science. So this is an example of a simple embodied agent, right? So far doesn't have any ability to learn, but it can interact with its environment, it can respond to queries. And then we could then, and as we say here, we could improve it by letting it accumulate data, learning from its answers. We could link it with maybe high-performance computing to do many questions at once, etc. But the essentials are here of something that can do something useful. So let me now look at an example in which we might use this. This is a problem that some of my colleagues at Argonne have been working on, design of antimicrobial peptides. So probably most of you here know more about antimicrobial peptides than I do, but we want to be able to design a short sequence of amino acids that can interfere with the operations of certain pathogens without damaging the cells in which those pathogens are going to be found. And so if you think about how a human scientist might go about that, they would probably go out and read the literature to find out about the design, what we know about antimicrobial peptides, their structural and molecular properties. They might combine information about intracellular pathways to identify potential routes towards interfering with the functioning of the pathogen. They might conduct simulations, docking simulations and others, to see how a particular peptide might function in a particular context. So these are all things that, of course, we could encapsulate into agents. So, for example, generating hypotheses concerning potential mechanisms of action. So that's the one. Arguably, that's just what I just showed you. The peptide expert would do that. Of course, we'd like this expert to know much more about peptides and related topics, so we might want to create our own foundation model for that purpose, or fine-tune or refine ChatGPT for that purpose. We want to be able to make millions of such requests, not just individual ones, so we need infrastructure so our scientists can perform millions of such requests, which is not something you can do with ChatGPT today, at least not at a reasonable cost. And you'd like this expert to improve over time. So lots of ways we can try and improve that. But let's think what else we might do. So we might want to combine it then with an agent that knows how to align proteins and predict structure. So we have tools for that. So we could train something, create something to be able to take a protein sequence and go ahead and predict its structure. Then we might want to be able to evaluate a structure against various perspectives, and we might use other databases and computational technologies for that purpose. So now we've got 3 agents that we want to be able to interact with. And then we might like to put this into overall framework that would allow us to run many of these things at once. So we've been doing this using technology called Globus Flows, which I know people at LBL use quite extensively, that will take a set of, in this case, a set of input peptides, invoke one of these agents after the other, to filter, basically, the set of peptides that we think are interesting. This is what it looks like when you run the flow. We can skip that. But along the way, it's going to be interacting with, for example, Perlmutter or other supercomputers, using agents that know how to run HPC systems. And something that we're putting a lot of time into at Argonne, it would also be able to run experiments to test a particular peptide, for example. So first of all, synthesize the peptide. That's quite hard, annoyingly. But then once you've synthesized it, test it against various microbial species, for example, by invoking an agent that knows how to run experiments. And as an aside, we've been having a lot of fun with developing techniques that use large language models to extract protocols from the literature, and then by a process of simulation and experiment, learn how to translate those literature protocols into instructions to particular experimental apparatus. And once you've done all this, you can then go back and generate additional peptides and continue the loop. And you have, in a sense, a self-improving system that, if your active learning techniques are good enough, will be able to converge at a rate that is superior to that of a human scientist trying to tackle the same problem. And of course, there's a lot of ifs in that, but that's, I think, where we should be going. Okay, so this is my. I had some fun creating this picture. I hope you appreciate it. I can't point at individual agents, but I'm sort of now going to take a big step back and say, well, let's assume that we believe this story, that we as scientists and as organizations established to serve scientists can't keep up with this exponential growth in problem complexity and data by using the same old methods of individual scientists working using some automation, but a lot of manual labor. And let's assume that we think that means we're going to move to a future in which we need to create increasingly powerful AI agents to which we can hand off interesting parts of our work. These agents will be, as I said, things that know about peptides, that know about how to run HPC simulations, that know how to do experiments, that know how to generate hypotheses. Some of those things are obviously much easier than others. That know how to interpret the results of experiments, etc. And then, under presumably very tight human supervision, this is not pure automation, but in a proposed partnership, are able to be assigned challenging problems, which may be tackling a particular scientific problem or generating new data to help understand some unknown phenomenon, or to help train better AI models. What sort of environment will they need to work in? So I'd suggest they need four things. First of all, we need robotic physical labs that can be controlled by such agents, so that we are no longer bottlenecked by the time that human workers need to perform experiments. Of course, the human workers aren't going to go away, but they're going to be doing less mundane things once we build sufficiently sophisticated robotic labs. We need to use our high-performance computing systems and perhaps cloud systems, not only to perform the simulations and data analyses that they've been used for in the past, but to train foundation models and also to be able to respond quickly to requests for example, computational validation of hypotheses put forward by our scientific agents. Under the covers, we need to rethink perhaps how our data is organized and what data we collect. I'll say more about that in a minute. And then above, we'll have a growing number of these embodied agents, and we need infrastructure to host them. We need teams to create them, monitor them, evaluate them, etc. Evaluation, by the way, is one of the hardest things in this context. We saw, I showed earlier this nice graph with the improvement, with performance on a whole range of benchmarks improving to apparently human levels in areas like language understanding and dictation, speed, and so forth. But we need benchmarks that will allow us to evaluate whether someone understands protein biology or quantum physics or whatever it is that we want our systems to be able to do. And those benchmarks largely don't exist at the moment, so that's another source of concern. And then, for better or worse, our data and our robotic labs and our computers don't all exist at a single location. So we're going to need to be able to create some sort of universal data and compute fabric that will link together all DOE resources, and perhaps others, in such a way that agents and scientists can engage with them effectively. So that's what I would suggest is the future of what the future science environment should look like if we want our scientists to be able to keep up with these rapid developments. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about data. Someone recently said to me, or said in some context, DOE is the Saudi Arabia of data, which is, first of all, it's a horrible image looking at this. And actually, apparently, the US produces more oil than Saudi Arabia at the moment. So you could say DOE is the US of data, but that doesn't have the same ring to it. So the argument is that we have a lot of science data. And of course, JGI and many other sources have a lot of data. And the argument is therefore DOE should lead in AI for science. But so I think some questions we need to be thinking carefully about is, do we have we have lots of data. How much data do we have? And in some communities know the answer to that question better than others. But is that data the right data, or is it useful? How do we make use of it? What do we want our AI models to be able to do? So I suggested a couple of trivial things in the earlier slides. Ask questions about peptides, propose hypotheses for mechanisms of action. There are presumably many other things we'd like these models to be able to do. What data do we need to train these models? Do we have that data? Is it in the right format? What do we need to do to prepare our data for training AI models? And I think in some cases we know the answer to those questions, but often we don't. And it's worth looking, in this context at the really fairly, arguably the limited number of cases where we've seen great success in the training of foundation models. So large language models are clearly a great success, and they're trained on, well, basically data that's resulted from the digitization of text, human-generated text over the last several decades. And of course the quality of that text varies, but a lot of it, scientific literature, is quite good. Others, the web varies, but it's still got a lot of well-structured and somewhat curated information. Enough that we've been able to create large language models that, in some sense, very vague sense, understand a large amount of human discourse. Weather models are another example of great success. I don't know if you followed this work, but we can now generate it. We have AI-based medium-range weather forecasting systems that can do better than, or at least as well as, in some cases, better than physics-based models for 2-week weather forecasts. And why is that possible? It's because they've got decades of reanalysis data sets created by the National Weather Services that basically say exactly what happened, given the initial conditions, what happened over a 2-week period. And then, of course, we're all familiar with AlphaFold, which is created because of the existence of the protein data bank. So we might think, well, where can we create similar data sets in order to create models that are similarly expert in other areas of importance to DOE, of importance to JGI, etc. Now, there's lots of industry groups out there trying to do this. probably trying to get hold of JGI data for that purpose, and that's not necessarily bad, but I think we also should be seeking to control our own data and think about how we can build our own models for this purpose. And also thinking, well, what new data will we need in order to train the models of the future? Increasingly, people are looking at, given that we don't always have 30 years worth of data behind us, thinking, well, how can we use active learning techniques to quickly identify the data that's needed to train a model for a particular purpose, and then use automated systems to generate that data. Perhaps that will be the way in which our automated labs will be used increasingly in the future. So I mentioned here some things I think we should be doing. Conduct a comprehensive data inventory, straightforward. Engage with the community to think how they're going to use agents and foundation models. One thing I find is that we've actually had great fun in the materials space running a series of hackathons where we get people from around the world to come together and try and do interesting things with the models that exist. And it's amazing how inventive some of these young and older people are. Evaluation suites I mentioned, but let me mention it again, just 'cause it's so important. That could be an area in which JGI could make foundational contributions by developing evaluation suites that will tell us when models developed by others are doing well. And then we need to actually engage in using models, building and using models of this sort. So at Argonne, we've got the Aurora GPT project, which is creating a foundation model so far based on language, text only, but also starting to engage science data. Others are doing similar things. We've established a thing called the Trillion Parameter Consortium to bring people together who are engaged in these activities. So I encourage you to participate in that if you can. I'd be happy to share information. Okay, so overall I think the message that I want to convey and hopefully persuade one or two of you of is that if we're going to remain competitive in this world of exponentially improving AI, we need to be thinking about how we can harness this technology to accelerate our work, and I think we'll do that by building agents of various sorts for many of the mundane things we do and some of the less mundane things that we do. And I mentioned a few here. You can see they range across a pretty broad spectrum, and I'm only providing a partial list. But in each of these, there's opportunities for, I think, quite rapid progress, because not many people are working on many of these problems. We're having fun ourselves on several of these, configuring and running physical experiments, searching the literature for data and protocols, formulating hypotheses. My colleague Rick Stevens is very active in that area, coming up with protocols to test hypotheses, and then running experiments and simulations. But many more things remain to be done. So this is the future that I suggest we should be looking towards. First of all, sort of not mentioned here, but taking for granted is increasingly powerful foundation models, which remains to be seen. Will they be created specially for science or not? I think we need to be assuming they should be, but be ready to backtrack and embrace commercial models if they turn out to be sufficiently powerful for our purposes. But then building out this community of science agents and talking to our friends in computing facilities about how we're going to create and host these systems. There's probably a whole new discipline of science infrastructure providers, people who are going to be able to know how to create and host and run science agents, and then work with scientists so that they can switch from perhaps, you remember the day you used to go to the library? I remember that. We don't go to the library anymore. Now we use Google to find things, Google Scholar, at least myself. So in the future, perhaps there'll be many other things in which we'll turn to computational agents for the same purpose. And interesting question is who's going to run those agents, and how will How will we support them? How will we determine whether they're accurate? We sort of assume that Google Scholar is accurate, I think at least I do, which is not unreasonable, but maybe we may be less comfortable if we ask, for example, for possible hypotheses of mechanisms of action for some protein. If we get an answer back, how do we know whether that's correct? Maybe we want to make sure that we know exactly what data went into training that model. So those are my remarks. Thank you very much.
We have many, many questions. I think you were first.
Thank you. That was a great talk. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'm very interested in the antimicrobial peptide discover scientist, agent, or whatever. So I'm pretty sure you guys probably have already done it. Have you compared to human scientists in terms? It's probably immensely more efficient, but how much by 10 or 100-fold? At what cost? The carbon footprint,
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful question, and it's maybe I'll spend just a minute giving a sort of an honest appraisal of that work. So I think the people involved are doing wonderful work in terms of hypothesis generation. The limiting factor here has been, because we seem to lack suitable protein synthesis capabilities, is the time required to. It turns out we have to send our orders to China. How can that make any sense? But anyway, so far we've gone around that loop once, and we've got one promising candidate. I'm pushing the team to go around it again in the next few weeks, and we'll see how they do. As always, unless you automate every step, you're not going to get a big acceleration. Computer scientists refer to this as Amdahl's law. That your programs are only as fast as the slowest step in your application. Anyway, but I think that it's looking promising there. Yes, I'm fascinated by this question of how do we compare with scientists. I think I've been wondering about whether we could stage some sort of competition. Does anyone know who John Henry is? He was the guy back in the day who apparently competed with a steam driver. Steam file driver is a legend, I think. So what would a John Henry competition look like to compare a purely human team against a human team plus AI? There have been some studies of that sort, but none, I believe, in our particular field. So if you're interested in that, I'd love to talk to you about it.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ian. That's a great, thought-provoking presentation. Great to start with that today. So I'd like to ask a question about provenance, so the evidence trail, where things come from. And so we know that life scientists and the institutions of the countries they work in care a great deal about how their data are used. We know that in various applications, take diagnostics or therapeutics, for legal reasons, one needs to know where things come from. The scientific method itself traditionally requires us to be able to demonstrate and reproduce. So in a world where we have agents freely roaming around foundation models, roaming around data sets, iterating back and forth, do we give up on provenance? How do we address that challenge, or do we just say, no, that's not part of this future?
Well, my view is we should not give up on it. We need to take perhaps a fairly nuanced look at it, though. If you think about humans, of course, you write a paper, you cite your sources, but you don't cite the thousands of papers you've read throughout your life that built your mental model of the world. So similarly, I think, but you probably know what those papers were, more or less. I think it's important that we know what our foundation models are trained on, and that's a concern that one might have with some of the commercial systems. And then you want to architect them so that they can give pointers to literature or databases for any factual statement that they make. Obviously, that's not entirely satisfactory. They won't necessarily explain the full reasoning path, but it will at least tell you what you can check to determine whether the conclusion they reach is based in facts.
Hey, very thought-provoking talk. So given that this is the energy and environment meeting, I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on the energy overhead that is going to be incurred if you are going to really roll this out at scale, because even large companies are seeing increases to carbon footprint just from computation on existing frameworks when you run AI, but then you have to move to GPUs, that sort of thing. There's a material cost, there's an energy cost, there's an operational cost, and what's your view on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a very sophisticated view. I am certainly aware of the concerns, the challenges that it's posing in terms of emissions, our electric grid, and so forth. I think, I suppose my view is I'm somewhat of a techno-optimist. I think that ultimately human prosperity is increased by greater technology rather than reduced. But clearly we need to be putting maybe a lot of our intellectual effort into understanding how to reduce the environmental impact of these capabilities. And so, the fact that people are looking at deploying large systems in Texas that'll be purely solar powered, that people are looking at new nuclear power plants. I think these are positive directions. Obviously, they're not sufficient.
I have a question. Oh, do we have time?
No, okay. I'm sorry, it would be the last question for the moment, right? Because we have to keep with time, right? So keep your questions. We will have a break, please.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
I go? Oh, I was just wondering what implications this has for how we train future scientists, especially since maybe scientists today aren't trained to go into a library and how to look up things like that. So a lot of what the science agents we want them to do are basic foundational skills. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I have a fairly simplistic view of education. I think you get kids doing things and they'll learn how to do them. And I think at the moment, actually, you'll find a lot of students they want to do this stuff more than anything. So in effect, you don't need to lead them to water to get them to drink. But there's a fascinating question as to the librarian skills that actually underpin so much of our modern society, but are not necessarily recognized or taught. And I'm not sure how we do better at that. But, Well, thanks again, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.